Morning, everyone, and welcome to Business Breeders, a live webinar series hosted by Goodman Group at Brock University. My name is Abdul Rahimi, and I'm the director of Goodman Group in the Goodman School of Business. Goodman Group is pleased to be hosting this webinar series, and thank you all for joining us today. There are well over 100 registrants for this session, and I would like to wish a very good afternoon to those of you joining us from Europe or Africa, and a warm or perhaps cool good evening to those in Asia. Goodman Group is a community-focused learning and development services provider that works to support entrepreneurs, professionals, and businesses through our consulting services, startup support, and accredited certificate programs for professional and executive development. I'm so pleased so many of you could join us today from all corners of the world to take a break and take part in this webinar series. This webinar series was designed to focus on areas of leadership, management, innovation, financial, and social impacts of trending topics, where faculty from Brock University and leading industry experts will be speaking about these topics. This webinar series is hosted on Wednesdays from 11 to 11:45. Before I introduce today's webinar leader, might I pause for a moment to review the format and agenda for today. The webinar lead will speak for a brief period and will delve into your questions. Although we'll start with those that came at the time of registration, we'll also answer your questions live. So, for those of you watching us live, I invite you to put your questions into the chat feature, which is open now. Now, I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar lead, Dr. Andrew Gaudes, Professor and Dean at the Goodman School of Business. Dr. Gaudes has served as a business dean for 8 years, and since 2017, he has served as the dean at Goodman School of Business. Yes, folks, he is my boss, so please be kind. His list of accomplishments are long. He has led in developing programs and partnerships for undergraduate and graduate students with world-leading business schools. He also led in forming the only Canadian business school partnership with the United Nations for a paid co-op placement of Goodman students at UN agencies worldwide. He serves on the board of directors for the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce, as Ontario representative for the Business School Associations of Canada, member of the Americas Advisory Board for the European Foundation for Management Development, or EFMD, and is currently the president of the International Partnership of Business Schools, or IPBS. His research interest lies in virtual methods of collaboration, niche strategies, and crisis management, as if you planned it, Andrew. His work on virtual collaboration has led to creating teleworking opportunities for vulnerable populations and people with disabilities in regions of Central and South America. The work has contributed to telework declarations signed by governments in Peru, Costa Rica, and Colombia. He has participated on numerous international panels on virtual collaboration and the future of work, including a joint meeting of the World Bank and IMF, or International Monetary Fund. Dr. Gaudes has taught courses at the graduate and undergraduate level in management and entrepreneurship in many countries, including Canada, Egypt, Ukraine, Trinidad, and France. He has also developed and delivered online courses and curriculum as an adjunct for Michigan State University's Virtual University. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's hear it from Dr. Andrew Gaudes. Andrew, over to you.
Well, thank you, Abdul. Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be present with you today, and thank you so much for joining us together to have a conversation about what does it mean to manage through the unimaginable. So where are we today? Here we are, March 13th, was the declaration at our university that we were stopping operations as we knew them. March 12th was the declaration that the World Health Organization put us in a place of a pandemic. It changed everything for us, changed everything for how we operate, where we are, who we connect with, how we connect, and how we just get through the day, knowing full well that we don't know where we're going to be next week, next month, or 6 months from now. In some ways, we're still in that space. We're somewhere around 11 weeks into this. We've transitioned as organizations, as individuals, to see us through this as best as we can. For us at our university, we moved courses online. We had our students transition midstream into taking courses that were placed into an online space and have them continue their studies and then evaluated at the end of the term. For our faculty and our staff, we moved them to remote method of work, distributing them to basically to their homes around our region. Far and wide, we all worked in a way that was independent of each other, but more so than ever collaborative and team-based in a way that was astonishing, amazing. We carried on the work that we had in front of us days before the pandemic was announced, but we did it almost upside down compared to what we imagined. Conversations in February about speculating on whether we would be online, whether we could work remotely, would have been probably resoundingly, no, it's not possible. But in a matter of days, we transitioned and moved ourselves into a space that is allowing us to be successful in delivery, but also optimistic that we will carry through this and come out the other side in a better place. In many ways, what we've gone through is we're on a bridge. We're transitioning through a period that we're disrupted, and we're working through it as best as we know. This challenge, though, it's kind of like the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge in that there's a fog in the middle of it, and we don't really know where the end is. We're traveling into the fog. There's no horizon. There's no terrain that we see on the other side. But we know there is another side. We just don't know what it will look like or when. And so that creates challenges for us. If we think of another analogy, for many of us, maybe you've experienced this in the colder climates where you're on a highway driving and you hit an icy patch. And all of a sudden, you've lost control of your car. And for that moment, you really don't know what to do other than to not do anything, because to do something could actually lead to a worse event. So we slide over the ice, or we move ourselves through the ice to the other side. When we get to the other side of that icy patch, more often than not, our heart's racing, our breathing is shallow and rapid. We feel anxious, and for some of us, we slow down. For some, we actually go to the shoulder and stop, and for some, we just carry on while we're on the ice right now. And we're facing something that's in many ways beyond our control. And when we do get to the other side, where the ice is gone and we're back on the pavement, for some of us, we will carry on. For some, we'll have to stop on the shoulder and figure out, what did we just get through? But for others, we're going to slow down and realize the pace needs to be different. So what I'd like to do is have a conversation with you today on what does this mean? What's the crisis like? What is it like being on that ice? What's it like being on the bridge during something like this where you can't see the other side? And what does it mean? How do we handle being on that ice without control, or on that bridge without the certainty of when it ends? And what does it mean when we actually cross that bridge or get past that ice to the other side, and what we face and how we manage that? So I hope to walk you through a couple of points and observations, and hopefully some, let's call it nuggets of good content that allows you to think about how you manage yourself, but also how you manage others if you are a manager of your in your organization. So today, what I'd like to have a conversation with you about is, what is crisis management? What's it mean to lead through a crisis? What are some coping mechanisms or coping strategies that might also help you in carrying through this period, and also really just good pieces of information that are good for anyone, any given day, whether or not we're in a crisis or just regular activities. And then at the end, I'd like to just offer a few practical applications that might actually just help you today in your day-to-day activities on carrying through this period of uncertainty. So, crisis management. What is that? Well, if we knew what crisis management was and what crisis present ourselves with in future days, we'd be able to define it more exactly. But the challenge is crisis events are really not known, not really imaginable. as I use in our title of the Managing Through the Unmanageable. Some say it's unthinkable, some say it's absurd as far as activities and events. But the fact of the matter is, a crisis is an event that has the potential to completely impact, completely impact organizations and institutions. So what a specific crisis might be is hard to forecast, but for sure, we're in the middle of one right now because we are seeing an impact across organizations and institutions that could be profound and complete as far as potentially impacting negatively. So what we'd like to think about is crisis as preparing for something that is a large-scale event that has the potential of completely, fully impacting negatively an organization. Now, crisis management is really relatively new in the whole scheme of how we manage. And most people would agree that it's the whole idea of crisis management came out of the Tylenol poisonings of the early 1980s, where there was capsules that were contaminated and tampered with at a number of stores in the United States. Now, Johnson & Johnson is the organization that owns and controlled Tylenol, and they went into a place where they went back to their purpose, their core strategy, their ethics statement, and drew from that how they were going to operate going forward. One of the things they saw was their core purpose was the health and safety of all of their stakeholders. And by such a statement, it meant to them that they were going to pull all of that product off the shelves and make sure that no one else would be affected by this tampering, which was a very different approach than anyone would have imagined at the time. More often than not, organizations would have said, that was an event, it's behind us now, we move forward. So this was the first time that Johnson & Johnson took a leadership role in managing a crisis, which meant they were going to eliminate a product for a period of time to ensure that their stakeholders were safe. It is because of the product tampering of Tylenol that today we see protective covers on products at our grocery stores and our pharmacies around the world. It is because of the Tylenol tamperings today we don't have capsules anymore. We have caplets so that they cannot be tampered with. So that's an event that was impacted upon an organization through malicious activities. We also see another example of crisis management or crisis event being the 9/11 towers, the World Trade Towers in New York, as well as Washington, D.C.'s Pentagon being victims of attack by terrorism. Unthinkable again. No one ever thought that people would put together the idea of car bombings and hijackings to the extent that we saw in the 9/11 event. And again, that event made change to our organization and our operations, particularly in air travel, where all of a sudden you saw limitations to carry on luggage, screenings, not only at airports, but now into public safety buildings, as well as protection around buildings to minimize the vehicles being able to get close to structures. So these are events that are unthinkable, unimaginable, that lead to circumstances that we change how we operate in our day-to-day lives. Now, crisis management can be broken down into a number of different areas. It's such a large topic that certainly I'm not going to be able to cover much, but I want to be able to just identify a few key notes within crisis management before I go into some of those coping mechanisms that I mentioned. So there's different types of crisis. There's different systems that are affected by crisis. There's phases to crisis management, and there's stakeholders. So let's talk about this for a moment. So when we think about crisis types, some of them that come to mind very quickly are things like physical crisis, where there's accidents or failures in products. There's personnel, where we might have disruptions of the workplace by virtue of, it could be a strike, it could be a work stoppage, but it's affecting personnel. We have economic crisis types, which we've experienced a few times in recent history, particularly 2008 with the market crash. Recessions, criminal, where it could be a hostage taking, or as I described with Tylenol, the product tampering. And information, which we're seeing more and more now as a crisis type because of theft of IP, cyber attacks, and phishing. Reputation, fake news, slander is another type of crisis. And then the last one is natural disasters, which probably comes to mind most often for most people, such as floods, earthquakes, and what we're experiencing now, a pandemic. Now, as I describe those types, you probably realize to yourself that many of these things are what we're experiencing now. It's not just the pandemic. It is the fact that we're seeing fake news about what helps in reducing the impact of the COVID-19 virus. We're seeing cyber attacks because of the opportunity of our distributed workplace allowing for people to connect in malicious ways and affect us. We're seeing criminal activities as well, with theft and burglaries increasing because shops and organizations close because the social distancing. We're seeing economic, without a doubt, at this point, and we're seeing physical. The fact that operations are not necessarily being covered completely everywhere, as well as personnel. We're seeing disruption in how we work. So one of the things that comes out of this is understanding that a crisis, one impact, one event can actually affect many different areas and create new types of crisis, which is part of that compounding effect that we're certainly experiencing now. When we think about systems of crisis, again, we can start thinking about how a crisis and an impact of an event can affect different types of systems. So, of course, technology, probably the ones that we see most often through lightning storms and disasters that involve weather and an earthquake, is that equipment shuts down and plants shut down. And so all of a sudden we're without power or without communication. And the more that we're getting connected, the more that we see these systems affected through crisis. What I find really interesting in this particular one is that it's because of the technology that we're, in many ways, mitigating the crisis of the social, what's necessitated out of the social distancing because of the pandemic. We also have organizational infrastructure crisis system. So budgets, and of course we can see how our budgets have been impacted on this, as well as hierarchy, how we flatten hierarchy in order to make sure that we're more nimble and responsive in events such as this. Human factors is an interesting one because really we're talking about the fit of people with technology. And this has been really, really interesting for our particular event because all of a sudden, as I described, we have faculty and staff who are working remotely in a way that they never had expected to do, let alone overnight. And it's been a tremendous effort by the staff and faculty who I work with to see how they've been able to adjust to this change. But that's a human factor element where we see people's fit with technology and processes and their ability to accommodate that. We have also organizational culture, whether or not the culture is able to adapt and be nimble. And as we've seen or heard the word so often over these past few weeks, the ability to pivot in the circumstances that have been presented to us. And emotions is the fifth system. How do we respond to this? How are we reacting? How do we are we open to seeing people seek counsel within our organizations? Are we able to express ourselves freely? And in many ways, the emotions component is going to be one of those areas that I address through the mechanisms of coping, as well as practical applications going forward in this presentation. The last item I'd mention is, third last item on crisis management is around stakeholders. Of course, you can think about staff and management and consumers, but we really also have to think about our broad community. And at the end of the day, it's anybody that's impacted by the decisions that we make as an organization, as individuals. And personally speaking, even ourselves as an individual, we have stakeholders, and the decisions we make affect people around us. So we always have to be conscious about how our decisions impact others in a period of crisis. Last thing about crisis management is to talk about the phases. And this is really important because crisis management and leadership through crisis is where you work through these phases, but you also try to respond or be proactive as these phases are coming to when we're faced with them, stumbling. First one is signal detection. This is really important. Signal detection, every crisis has signals. It's a matter of us picking up on those signals and knowing what those signals might mean. In some ways, it's a little bit of creativity and being able to look outside of an organization or outside of your operations to see a signal and to see that compound into what it could actually be for an event to an organization or individuals. So those are the earliest warning indicators that are in place for any crisis event. It's our ability to pick up on them and read them as something that could lead to an event impacting us as an individual or as an organization. Of course, once we have a signal and we've interpreted it as being something that's on the horizon and it's coming to affect us, it's preparation and prevention. So in the context of our pandemic that we're experiencing today, our signal detections for what was happening in China and what was happening as far as mobility and movement of the pandemic into other parts of the world. And so we started to prepare. We started to think about how are we going to be able to operate in a way that minimizes this impact to our operation. And then we move into the third phase of containment and damage limitation, which is what we're really doing now with the social distancing and making sure that we're working in a way that minimizes the transmission of the virus is a way of trying to contain as best as possible. And we're seeing this elasticity of the wave being flattened, and then all of a sudden this resurgence of the virus in places, and the concern that are we containing enough, are we not containing enough, carrying our conversations in these weeks as we decide as to do we remain in our contained space, which goes to the next point of recovery. At what point do we open up our containment barriers and our limitations to allow people to come together again and be in groups, allowing for that going back to normal, whatever that looks like in future days. And that's all going through recovery. And then the last point of the phases is learning. The best part, the most poignant part about crisis management is that there's no pointing of fingers. It's about learning from errors, mistakes, signals that weren't detected. It really is about how do we identify where we could have done better in order to learn. So there's no pointing fingers, which is really important, because if we start looking at it as an exercise of pointing fingers, we're not going to have people who say, you know, I could have done this better, I could have adjusted here, or parts of an organization identifying where there was a weakness, because you're holding back on that kind of volunteering of information if it's looking for the search for the guilty within organizations. So learning and experience from self and others is really important in crisis management as well. So in that, with crisis management, you probably get a sense that a lot of things I talked about we're experiencing here and now. So you can see that crisis can impact many different systems. And also we can see that crisis leads to other crises and the interrelationship. And so right now we're in the middle of one crisis, but we're on the outset of potentially other crisis events by virtue of the fact that people have been working in this way for well into 11 weeks now, distributed. And that can, because of the change and the transition and working in places that we're not used to, can over time start to become a challenge in itself. So that leads into my next part. I noticed that, Abdul, you had a raised hand there. Maybe you had a question that you wanted to ask me at this time.
Yes, I've received a number of questions in here, and I just wanted to start to get some of those to you as well, as one or two of those you've already addressed. So I will put them here. How do you motivate and support a staff person who's struggling mentally and emotionally? Is one of the questions that's come up.
And that's a great question, and I think it leads into my next part, which talks about how we mitigate the stress that leads to that demotivation and the anxiety that's present in ourselves and our employees around us. So the best way to look at this is we've had lots of conversations over the years with respect to a healthy diet and what's good to eat and what you should be consuming in order to remain healthy, a good, healthy mind, healthy body. Well, one of the other areas that we could look at using that analogy is having a healthy mind platter of activities and initiatives that we carry out over our day-to-day lives, just to make sure that we maximize our ability to be able to adjust, and as I use the word pivot, but also be able to also still generate creativity and let's use the word productivity, just to feel that you're able to be successful in accomplishing tasks. What I've described so far about crisis and what we're going through now definitely generates a lot of stress for individuals. It causes people to feel anxious and unsure about their future. And stress will lead to disconnection for us of our brain to our tasks, and also creates this period of not being able to really make effective decisions or function. You might find yourselves, I know I've done this many times, and I'm sure everyone else has, where you're staring at this computer screen in front of us, and you're momentarily in a state of a trance. It might be, sunshine and birds singing in your head. It could be, what was I about to do? I can't remember now. And those are signs that there's a lot going on in your life, and you're really needing a way of just slowing it down and being able to absorb it in a way that your mind is able to accommodate. So what I'm going to recommend as far as coping mechanisms is really a healthy diet of activities for the mind, which helps provide physical and mental well-being necessary for a quality life. And hopefully this addresses the question, Bill, that you've asked. Mm-hmm. So there's 7 different activities I'm going to share with you today that in many ways, I think you're going, when you hear each of them, you're going to say, yeah, well, of course that makes sense. Sometimes we need to be reminded of them and how they should all be part of a daily set of activities and really consumption, if we use the word about a diet, for us to be able to be healthy in mind, spirit, body. And the first one, which most people will say, I agree, and it really is most critical, and we ignore repeatedly, is sleep. We all need an appropriate amount of sleep, and we're not necessarily good to ourselves in this capacity. We know that depression associated with long work hours is primarily the result of sleep deprivation. We know that more hours spent awake create more sleep pressure, and so the need to sleep becomes greater and greater with the longer that we're awake. And we know that now that sleep is not just critical for the body, but it's also critical for the brain. It rebuilds our brain from one day to the next so that we're able to face the next day. So one of the things that helps tremendously, honestly, is brief naps if you are feeling tired. So every brief nap helps boost cognitive performance and helps us feel more alert. If you need one, you should take one. So we have to keep in mind that sleep, as much as we know it's important, that we follow what we've learned and create a regular schedule of sleep hours so that we do have that regeneration of the mind and body. And that's just one of the 7. What we also need to look at is what we could call playtime. Playtime is where it's a distraction. It's play in its simplest word. It's a basic system. It's similar to one's paper that we're in. It's core to us as much as fear, panic, and maternal instinct. Play is a fundamental part that we should be experiencing daily. Human play and laughter is a social phenomenon. It enhances capacity for us to innovate, adapt, and allow us to master changing circumstances. It puts us in places that we have to figure things through. Play could be a puzzle, game of chess, playing with kids, sport, number of things. It's distraction with joy associated with it as well. It allows us to escape, but it also allows us to reconcile difficult or contradictory circumstances and often shows us a way out of our problems. So playtime is a good thing for us to insert into our daily activities. So the next thing, if you have any teenagers watching this, I encourage you to usher them out of the room at this point, because they might see this as validation. We all need downtime. And downtime is intentionally having no intention to consciously engage in doing anything specific. It's doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. We need this on a daily basis. Not 8 hours like sleep, but we do need this. The unconscious thought produces better decisions when people decide immediately than when people decide immediately using conscious logical reasoning. This is important to understand. Quite often we're faced with decisions that can be material, and we put them in the moment of the decision being required at the time of the analysis, when in fact, the best decisions are made in the time of calm and downtime. And you probably have found in yourself those Eureka moments that take place when you didn't expect it to actually occur because you're not thinking about it. I know for me, which is interesting because it's changed up a bit, my commute was 45 minutes, not so much anymore. But that was my downtime. That was a time when I tuned out And it was interesting because it was usual that in that time, there was periods of coming to resolution and decisions that would have been not possible at the time that I was really working through them. The fact that unconscious thought and incubation time is conducive to better decision making and insight has profound implications for managers and leaders. Because when you think about what we're faced with, this rat race of going from meeting to meeting to meeting, decision, 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 we're really stealing from ourselves the opportunity for insight, contemplation, to think about without thinking and arriving at solutions and decisions. So I encourage you to think about this part, the downtime, as an important part of your day activities. It also helps lets us moderate the relationship between experience and new insights. So we can take what we know, take what we've experienced, and also the insights that are generated allow us to bring things together in a different way. The other one from downtime is time in. And that's time in introspectively, thinking about yourself, inside yourself. So it's a very particular type of consciousness, focused attention on the inner life and of the here and now. So you're present with your experience, but you're not judging the experience. You're maintaining a self-observing attitude, which is an altered state of awareness, but it allows you to suspend logical thought for a while and really just think about the present space. So you think about meditation, you think about mindfulness and paying attention to the present moment without judgment, breathing, closing eyes, and just focusing on where you are and who you are. And this is also something as far as builds the healthy platter for the mind, but it's also something that you should be factoring in, scheduling into your day every day. The other part that we've talked about here, and I've talked about many times over the weeks, is about connection and being connected to people. Social interaction is right now quite elusive because of social distancing, but it's not impossible because of our technology that supports it in different ways. But connection time is critical. From our earliest days of life, our connections to others provide a source of feeling seen, safe, secure. Important. Social support is reliably related to beneficial efforts on cardiovascular, endocrine, and immune systems. So engaging and connecting with people is critical for us and our well-being. And we cannot eliminate that from our day-to-day activities. More than Zoom meetings, this is where we have social interaction. Lonely individuals may experience higher levels of perceived stress, react more negatively to stress, and will benefit less from social interactions. So the connection time is another very important factor to bring into our daily diet for mental health. And physical time. We've talked about this, and you've read about this, I'm sure, and seen much on this, that we need to step away from our technology and get active physically, whatever it is that is at your disposal, whether or not going for a walk, riding a bike, running, but engage in physical activity daily, so that you can achieve a brain health and plasticity that is necessary, that comes with just the movement of the blood and the circulation. It is demonstrated to have a significant positive and global impact on mental functioning. So you cannot discount the importance of inserting that physical time as part of the daily diet. And the last one, which is funny because you would think that this is the most important one, but it's a contributing factor among the 7, is focus time. As we know that being focused on a project or an initiative or a task allows us to have an outcome that is productive, for lack of a better word. And attention management is an important part in order to be able to seek that performance, and that really goes to focus. We find that boredom and overstimulation leads to the inability to focus. The hard part is sitting in front of a display for 8 hours and going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting has an element of boredom to it, but it also has an element of overstimulation. And both of those combined start contributing to an inability to focus. So as you can see, focus is important, but in doses along with the other 6 components, starts to find the balance that, okay, I can focus on something, I'll give myself 25 minutes on this, and I'm going to give 5 minutes of that 30 to something else. And it might be, I'm just going to zone out and be in my downtime moment, or I might even go and have a nap for 10 minutes and come back to the screen. So the challenge is in this day and age, we're finding we are bombarded with information by virtue of technology that allows us to move and interact with people in a way that was not possible. Not even 5 years ago. It's just the change is dramatic in the last couple of years. But the focus is next to impossible because of the number of tasks that are put in front of us. We do not have the time to manage the tasks that are placed in front of us. So what we have to look at is being able to effectively manage one task at a time and push aside all the other pressures while we're doing it. The people who have that skill are the ones that will thrive when you can actually zone in on something for sometimes mere minutes to get through it, and then allow other things to come in one at a time rather than feeling the pressure of everything around you. It's almost like looking at your desk, and if your desk has one item on the surface of the desk that you're working on, in many ways you'll be able to focus on that better than when you have a desk that's piled with items and sheets and impending activities that are waiting for you to work through. So focus is also one that if you're able to focus, you'll be less overwhelmed with all the other elements that are around you. So that's the 7 areas that allow you to contribute to being better balanced with mental and physical, and also being able to work through your activities. So sleep, downtime, playtime, time in, connecting time, physical time, and focus time, all as part of a diet. Now the question is, how much of each do you do each day? And that's something that you have to figure out yourself. Sleep is probably the most prescribed as far as the number of hours that you should be looking at. And the others really start depending on how your day maps out and who your stakeholders are, your family, siblings, children, parents, spouses, partners. You have to be able to map it out so that you are able to bring those items in, and items in by yourself and some of them with others. But to be able to work that through on a daily basis is for you to take that pie of that you could describe the platter as, and cutting it into pieces that are manageable on a day-to-day. They are interrelated. They do contribute to areas of creativity, refreshment, processing capabilities in different ways, and that gets too fine-grained to be able to cover in this webinar. But my hope is that you see those 7 areas as places that you can go to if you don't already, or feel some satisfaction that you are attempting or working on some of those areas and just adding a few more to your day-to-day activities. Abdul, you have a question for me?
Yeah, we've got some number of questions that have come up. But as you're going through those 7 pieces, 2 things that came to my mind from previous reads and pieces. So one is from none other than Winston Churchill. At the time of the war, he is quoted as saying, "I like to take a nap during the day, in the afternoon, perhaps," as he was known to be taking naps. And he did that when his rationale for that was, "I'm most productive in the morning, and my mental agility is high at that period of time. So I like to have 2 mornings by having to take a nap in the afternoon at time, so that I have that little bit more focused." So I think that importance of sleep is there as well. And here's another one, just to add to the spectrum of quotes and famous folks, I suppose. Arnie Schwarzenegger is quoted as saying, "Sleep faster." I don't suppose that's going to work quite well in this area, though. So, so we'll see. So just switching on to some of the questions that have come in here as I look into my other screen to put those to you. So, a question, Dr. Gaudes, do you think that we could get a grasp on our future by focusing on managing the proliferation of globalization, free trade, rate of immigration, and crisis management as it relates to Canada's participation in globalization growth?
Back on that, your voice jumbled on me there for a bit. I apologize on that last part. Oh. You mentioned about, I'll let you read the whole thing over again. I'm sorry.
My apologies. I guess this is part of the new normal as we get used to technology. Do you think that we could get a grasp on our future by focusing on managing the proliferation of globalization, free trade, rate of immigration as well, crisis management as it relates to Canada's participation in globalization growth. If you could comment on any of those.
Well, that's an interesting question in the face of crisis management, because I wouldn't put that as much as a crisis as working on managing and creating relationships around the world with initiatives that are supporting different objectives with our country as well as other countries. When we talk about crisis, though, we're really talking about um, uh, unexpected events that are beyond our planning, our foresight, but that have massive impact. Now, if you are suggesting that any of those initiatives leads to either averting or avoiding a crisis, it's a matter of understanding how globalization or free trade has a crisis that is attached to that. What I do look at, particularly in this day and age, is that as much as we'd like to think about the crisis or potential crisis or events that are happening around the world for us, one of the, and it comes to our practical applications, that one I would be recommending is that we really do need to stay within what we are able to individually control, staying within our wheelhouse, understanding who we are and our competencies, our skills, our experience, and what we can contribute to a greater community. And by doing that, we minimize the stress associated with worrying about larger things that are well beyond our control. So when it comes to our day-to-day activities, one of the simplest areas for us to be able to actually impact profound change in the outcome of this pandemic are washing your hands, maintaining social distance, sneezing into your arm, and just don't touch your face, wear a mask. These are the things that on an individual basis has massive repercussions to how this global pandemic plays out. So, and at the same time, it's well within our control. If we control those elements, that area, the area that we can, we actually can contribute to things that are beyond our control. And that is the outcome of a pandemic lasting longer and longer and longer. So my area here is really focusing on what we're able to do and being able to manage and feel that we're contributing in a way that that helps a greater challenge that's facing quite literally the world.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Here's another one that has come through. And as I switch to the other screen, when the going gets tough, of course, profit-driven and self-preserving individuals tend to look for quote-unquote easy ways to get going. Can you recommend to us on how leaders can ensure that ethics, integrity, and doing the right thing would prevail?
Well, one of the areas that I look at is a sense of purpose. And when we think about organizations, we've really had to change how we operate, but that's not necessarily saying we change our purpose. For a university and for a business school, our purpose is to create a personal professional fulfillment for our students and our students experiencing successful outcomes. And honestly, it's a purpose that we should all be sharing. And if there's anyone within the organization that doesn't have that as a core purpose, they have to ask themselves, well, why am I here if I'm not here for the success of the students in this university? And so when we think about it that way, the purpose starts to drive our objectives, and how we shape and operationalize those objectives might change because of the pandemic. But we also have to make sure that how they change is conscious of how they impact their stakeholders, which is, it goes back to the crisis management. One of the areas is our stakeholders. How does it affect our community, our students, our staff, for the university, our faculty, the managers? And so these are questions that we should be asking ourselves continually, which hopefully will shape individuals' decisions to be conscious of others and ethical at the same time.
Thank you for that, Andrew. That's insightful.
So I'll just offer up a few really practical applications in many ways. One of the areas it's interesting now is, as I mentioned, crisis can lead into other crises. And we're really at a point where the prolonged social distancing does create challenges that is going to become greater and greater as we are sustained in this method of work. My hope is that the platter of activities, as I've described, will help minimize the stress associated with it, and the question about motivation. But also, there's some other areas that we can all work on to make sure that we remain healthy and feel positive. And one of the things I mentioned about with respect to the question on globalization is we really do need to remain within the realm of our control. Stay within our wheelhouse. Focus on what we can do and what we have an ability to move, and rely less upon or think less about what we can't control. I know the media is an interesting place to go right now. There's lots of news, but we can be consumed by consuming that information, and it can really create a sense of inability to make a change. So what I would recommend is minimize how much media you consume. It's important to be informed, but it's not important to be saturated with all of the different accounts that are being offered by all the different media channels available to us. You've probably heard this: sustain a routine in your day. It's really important to keep a cycle of time that you start, time that you stop, your awake and your sleep hours, but also you can punctuate that routine with variety. So change it up a little bit. Make sure that you're taking on different kinds of activities. Step away from the monitor, maybe take it to another place once in a while. But really make sure that you do have some sense of schedule in your day-to-day activities, so that you feel that there is some structure, but not so constraining that you're not changing it each day, but not so loose that you're really you're wondering how you're going to carry from one day to the next.
Those are great thoughts. Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Just a couple more, and then I'll be done. Managers, please manage outcomes, not process. And I've been saying for years and years, since I've been working in telework, that it really doesn't matter where you work or when you work, as long as it's produced on time and it's excellent. And that works for some types of work. It doesn't work for every kind of work, I appreciate. But if you're able to work remotely, it's a positive to be able to work where you are best and most productive. And then managers manage outcomes, not process. In this day and age right now, with everyone distributed, it really is an important approach to being able to be successful. And for staff, make sure you pace yourselves. This isn't a sprint. It really is a marathon. And the hard part is we don't know where the finish line is on this marathon. So you have to make sure that you've got a pace that is comfortable, that you're well nourished and hydrated, and that you carry on with the intent that you can make it to a finish line when we get there. Really critical for all of us is helping others, ensuring that we're able to find a way to support others in any way, shape, and form we can within our ability. Not only does it help others, but it helps us in our day-to-day as well. So, and one way of doing that is by connecting with others. So we've got multiple methods of media now to work with in different platforms, so use them. But here's something I would also recommend. Write a letter. It doesn't have the immediate gratification for you. Well, let me check on that. It doesn't have the immediate gratification for the person who's going to receive it, but writing the letter is going to be very gratifying for you, and sending it, and then knowing someone's opening that letter is going to be massively gratifying for the person who gets that letter. In a way that I can assure you, if you got a handwritten letter in your mail from someone you know, you would find that as a very special moment. So connecting with others through media, but also writing a letter, is a great cathartic way for people to just find space and relax. And the other part is breathe. Take time to breathe. And the last line I'll say, which is critical for everyone, is 3 words. It's communicate, communicate, and communicate. And
excellent thoughts, Randan, there. Thank you very much, Andrew, for those tips and tricks on how to look after oneself as well as others, as well as developing those coping strategies.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is all that we have time for this session of the webinar. I apologize if we were not able to get to all of your questions on the live session. We'll endeavor to address those through other mechanisms, email, and perhaps other sources. Join us next week at the usual time of 11 to 11:45 as we hear from our next expert. And the roster of sessions for the month of June are also available for you to register. So once again, thank you very much for all of you joining us from so many corners of the world. The recording of the session will also be available next week, and you will receive those invitations in your inbox as well. Andrew, once again, thank you very much for your insights. Lots of different tips and tricks for all at a topic that's very trending and top of mind for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Until next time, everyone, stay safe when we join again to hear from the next round of experts on business breeders from Goodman Group at the Goodman School of Business. Stay safe.